Hello, everyone. I am Ben, not Brian. Thank you for hanging out late in the afternoon to come and talk with us. Really exciting chat today. First, going to kick it off and allow the panelists to introduce themselves.
My name is Brian. I'm Brian from Thesis, head of business development. Thesis is a freedom tech venture builder in the space. We build Bitcoin and Bitcoin adjacent products. We're one of the founders and authors of tBTC, which is a decentralized and permissionless Bitcoin. Happy to be here today.
Hey everyone, my name is Robinson, and I'm the head of strategy at the Wormhole Foundation. For those of you who aren't familiar, Wormhole is an interoperability platform. So we enable chains to communicate with one another and send data back and forth. Most people know data today as sending tokens or NFTs, but you can send, for instance, instructions and things like that. So as Brian mentioned, super happy to be here as well.
So John alluded to this a little bit in his introduction, but almost a year ago to the day, we had a pretty substantial event in the Solana ecosystem that specifically affected Bitcoin. When it comes to Bitcoin in Solana DeFi, it was supported via a centralized exchange that held the Bitcoin on the back end and then issued a token representation of that on Solana to allow you to put that into DeFi protocols. When that event occurred, suddenly all of those coins were not collateralized because you didn't have access to the underlying. So specifically, what I want to ask you, Brian, is how does tBTC remove that risk from the system?
It's a great question. So the architecture behind tBTC, just quickly for those who are not familiar, tBTC is part of the Threshold network or Threshold DAO. That's the T in tBTC. It is a decentralized Bitcoin equivalent or a tokenized Bitcoin equivalent that's one-to-one. It is fully operated by the Threshold network of nodes, where your underlying Bitcoin, the spot Bitcoin asset, is custodied by this network of nodes. It's secured through Threshold cryptography, and then you're able to mint a tBTC or one-to-one equivalent on Ethereum and bridge it to places like Solana and other chains in DeFi for use. So one of the key things that we solved for, we did not sacrifice on decentralization. First and foremost, everything we do is open source and permissionless. So we're very much committed to building in public and making sure that if there is certain bugs or issues that are found in the system, they're addressed very transparently off the bat. And you can follow everything that's being done through our GitHub accounts and other company content in terms of to address that. So for us, we are looking to scale beyond and just double down on Solana because we're super excited to be here in the community.
And just to draw a clear distinction between other Bitcoins that exist, obviously you have native Bitcoin, and you also have WBTC, which is wrapped Bitcoin supported by BitGo.
That's right.
So can you talk a little bit about BitGo's model and how that works with this?
It's a great question. So effectively, one of the TLDR on tBTC is a decentralized WBTC. So the key thing is that when you're depositing your Bitcoin or minting WBTC, all of that is custodied by BitGo, which is a black box. Sure, they're testing it, and we're big fans of the BitGo organization. They've done a lot for crypto, but to be used in DeFi, it's sort of a hybrid solution for bridging Bitcoin, one of the oldest assets out there, right? So for us, we wanted to make sure we stayed true to the original Bitcoin vision and kept a decentralized network behind that. So the underlying Bitcoin custody is deposited in the wallet on the Threshold side. So when you deposit your Bitcoin in on the Threshold dApp, it takes about an hour to deposit and secure it in the network of nodes, which is about 300 right now on the system. And then once that's secured, it pings the other side of the bridge, which is on the Ethereum side. And those guys say, OK, this Bitcoin is secure, we're good to mint, and they mint that one-to-one equivalent, which is in the form of tBTC. And then the user has it in their wallet, and they can do with whatever they please, other DeFi degen activities, that sort of thing. And then when you come back to Bitcoin, it takes about 1 to 3 hours to process. We're working on getting that down as much as possible. And there's a small spread that's taken. It's about 20 bips, but generally speaking, it's pretty quick.
It's a good segue, Robinson. Let's talk about how Wormhole supports tBTC getting to Solana.
Yeah, the Threshold partnership, when it originally started, was great because I think it was a partnership in the truest sense of the word. There was a lot of ethos alignment. So Brian's mentioned, it's completely open source, so is Wormhole. We wanted to support an asset. There was almost a vacuum for BTC within Solana, and we wanted to support what we thought was, a ethos aligned, just to use a term that's popular right now, BTC that could proliferate within the Solana ecosystem. So we approached them, and they originally we went to some L2s, et cetera, but ultimately we wanted to get to Solana as quickly and securely as possible. But the way you can think about it at a high level is you have tBTC, which Brian just explained, and then Wormhole is essentially the rails in which a token, let's say, in this instance, can travel from chain to chain. So from Ethereum to Solana or Solana to Ethereum, which is oftentimes a pretty popular corridor, or to L2s, et cetera. So I guess, looking under the hood a little bit and the way that's done, Wormhole, like I mentioned, is an interoperability protocol. So at the base layer, we're just sending data between chains. But what you can build on top of that are things like token bridges. And I say that because that's the thing that most of us are familiar with and the thing that most of us use. Portal, if you're familiar with Portal, is a very popular UI that utilizes token bridge contracts that are built on top of Wormhole. So with tBTC, we're able to use kind of this existing infrastructure using the token bridge, but natively minting it on Solana. Yep. So that's at a high level how it works.
So I do want to make a slight tangent from tBTC really quick and just double in on Wormhole. So we have seen just countless security vulnerabilities in some bridges over the last 12 to 18 months. And I think that has prevented a lot of users from being confident in using bridges. So maybe if you could just quickly touch on the strides that the Wormhole team has made to improve security in the bridge.
Yeah, of course. I think I can sit here and say that security is, well, taking a step back, when we think about Wormhole, there's three things we're focused on, largely. To be as secure as possible, to connect everything, and to be as easy to use as possible. Like if a developer wants to build something like a token bridge, they can easily do that. So I can sit here and say those things are important, but to Ben's point, security truly is like the biggest value we provide. So when we take a step back and think about the things that Wormhole's done on the security front, number one, I think being open source can't be understated. Wormhole, we build in the open. Anyone can see the code that we put out there. We've had 15 plus public audits. I think audits are definitely extremely important, but some of the things that I think I'm really excited about that Wormhole's been working on and actually has already shipped, it's been in production for some time now, are two kind of critical security features. So I don't know if anyone saw Felix, works on the security team contributing to FireDancer, also contributes to Wormhole, but talked a lot about this concept of defense in depth. When we think about bridging in Web3, we can actually use a lot of best practices within Web2, and that's kind of what defense in depth is. What that essentially means is you're just adding layers to any sort of attack vector. So layers in which a malicious actor, if they wanted to drain the bridge, let's say, like we're all familiar with, they would have to get through, let's say, 3 things in order to even have a chance at a vulnerability. So what that looks like for us, we have a product called the Global Accountant. So I don't know if a lot of people know this, but we actually have a chain. We launched a blockchain within the Cosmos ecosystem. One of the main reasons we did that is because it gives us a ledger. So Wormhole itself is secured by 19 validators. We call them guardians. It's a proof of authority consensus. So they come to consensus on every message that goes through Wormhole. But what that blockchain enables us to do is those guardians can also share state to the blockchain. So when we think about a token bridge, let's say we're sending something from Ethereum to Solana, that is recorded on Gateway, Wormhole Gateway, and we can essentially use an accounting mechanism. So we can say, make sure that what's on Gateway equals what's happening on the Solana token bridge contract. If it doesn't equal, they're not one-to-one, we immediately cut the connection with that chain to make sure any sort of contagion is contained. So that's one. The second one is the governor. The governor essentially will limit notional flow between 2 chains. So let's say in a 24-hour period, you can only send 10 million across, from chain to chain, or there's a 1 transaction limit amount. Now, this is completely governed and controlled by the guardians, the 19 validators that we have on the network. But the goal with this is that, let's say we launch a lot of chains, we connect to a lot of new chains, and for Solana, that could put them at risk. So when we launch a new chain, what we can do is we can say, hey, we want the governor limit, so the limit so how much, let's say tokens can go back and forth, to be super low. And as that chain matures, as that chain gets more battle tested, that chain can then propose to the Guardian network to say, hey, we'd like to raise that limit slowly but surely until they get a limit that's 50, 60, 70 million, like I believe is the limit between ETH and Solana. So not to be too long-winded about security, but I think it's important for me to just drive home how much we're doing. And the last thing I'll say is that we're kind of going through this evolution of bridging where a lot of the bridges that we have today are what most people could boil down to like a multi-sig bridge. But the future of bridging, not to sound cliche, is here. And that's like kind of going down this trustless spectrum to ZK bridging. So replacing maybe these actors that we trust on the multi-sig with ZK proofs, which is kind of the gold standard we're working towards. We're planning on having kind of our first ZK verified message going from one chain to another before the end of the year, and we'll follow on with additional chains after that in 2024.
Awesome. Brian, going back to you.
Yep. Back to Bitcoin.
Back to Bitcoin. There's a lot of blockchains out there now. Why bring tBTC to Solana next?
It's a great question. Simply put it, the demand was there. This is the strongest community that I've seen. Over the summer. So tBTC, this is V2, by the way. So we launched V2 in about 3 months ago. And since that time, we've scaled on, outside of just the Bitcoin blockchain, 6 other chains, Solana being the most recent one. So it's also available on other L2s as well as Base. And by far and away, the Solana community has been the most receptive to our launch in terms of not only just momentum and excitement, but also adoption from a liquidity perspective. We're extremely bullish on this community and really just the products and services and the future of Solana. So for us, we recognize that right off the bat, and the fact that also the Solana ecosystem's battle tested, as you were kind of touching on earlier. And so for a product like tBTC, it made a ton of sense given the diversified sort of counterparty risk element with the Bitcoin custody side. So. And then in addition to the community excitement, we also had quite a few partners that were pretty excited, like our partners here at Wormhole as well. So it made a lot of sense. And for us, we were looking, we kind of had conquered the EVM side of things for launches. So we were looking into what makes the most sense from a non-EVM perspective, and Solana was top of the list.
So on a previous panel, someone that was on the panel had mentioned that one of the biggest things for new asset issuance on Solana was like demand and getting those partners off the bat. Can you speak a little bit to like your processes around bringing tBTC and stimulating that demand? Who are you engaging with? What types of people? Are these funds? Are these projects?
Yep, great question. So when we come to a new ecosystem or a new chain, usually we like to pick a couple partners to launch with, ideally a liquidity pool or two. And we'll bring incentives and flow with us. So for us, we were able to sort of filter down to a couple launch partners. One was Orca, and the other was Meteora. So we picked those 2 places as sort of the first launches for tBTC. And usually we can't launch with a lending market or derivatives off the bat. You have to launch on a sort of a pool, like a DEX ideally, to get going. And then usually launch with native asset of the ecosystem and maybe a stable coin or something like that. So usually 2 pairs. And then we introduced incentives on top as well from the threshold DAO or the T token as well, which helps sort of galvanize community support. So we launched with those 2 partners off the bat, and then over time have been working to build up the volume and liquidity to secure things like an Oracle, which actually, as of today, we are excited to announce that Pith is now supporting tBTC as an Oracle. So next up from a growth perspective for us, thank you, is growing into the lending markets. So yeah. So we're pretty excited about working with the Pith team, and they have a number of publishers now for tBTC, which is a big unlock for us because we've only been growing really on spot markets for tBTC itself, and now we can get into sort of the more fun stuff, derivatives and lending.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's a good segue. I want to talk a little bit more about the infrastructure around a tokenization project like this. So you mentioned Pyth. Oracles are super important.
Yep.
Obviously, you have the Wormhole bridge. What other components are necessary for launching something like a tBTC on Solana? And how did you guys go about approaching those?
Well, we usually like to validate the demand. So just speaking with the ecosystem and just making sure that, hey, there's demand for an asset like this. And given the fact that there was not a native Bitcoin on Solana, it made a ton of sense for us to go all in. We had our development team had to learn a little bit of Rust and get up to speed on that front. But the system is fully audited, and so we did end up deploying a native contract on Solana directly, and then have enabled you can bridge directly through the L2 contract on Wormhole. So it is not a double-wrapped version, which is kind of what WBTC has been historically. The beauty of the tBTC asset is that it's fungible with the rest of the chain ecosystems that we're natively deployed on. So all the L2s, ETH-L1 as well. So there's a big liquidity unlock there. Yes, you still have to go through the ETH settlement layer, but as part of our phase 2 efforts to grow deeper into Solana, we're looking to abstract away all of that. So ideally, let's say a few months from now, you can mint directly on Solana from Bitcoin. And that'll just reduce the friction even further and bring more liquidity flow into the ecosystem, which is something the community wants, and we validated that demand. So we're working on that as we speak. And then, as you kind of grow the volume, which is a big requirement for getting the Oracle, which, depending on the Oracle provider, they require, a few million a day in daily active volume cross-chain, or sort of like an aggregate number. So for us, we've been working really hard, making sure that we have the right partners helping support tBTC growth, and then just thinking about other ways to add utility. And then, of course, the incentives are also pretty nice too, because that makes it pretty juicy for folks to come in and get that ROI on the different pools. So.
That's actually something that I'd love to talk with you both about. I think that that's something that's super important, obviously, in a bear market, especially when treasury yields are 6%.
Yeah.
You need to be competitive, and if there's going to be demand for an asset like tBTC on Solana DeFi, there needs to be partnerships, there needs to be some sort of incentive, there needs to be something built up there. So, Robinson, if you have anything to opine on that as it relates to Wormhole and how you guys have done this for the Solana ecosystem or otherwise, and then Brian, we can kick it over to you.
Sure.
Yeah. So. Again, just to reiterate, Wormhole's like very much so the base layer, but when it comes to the token bridge that can be built on top, and anyone can build a token bridge, but we have our own token bridge contracts. We tend to work with a lot of different, let's say, asset issuers. So tBTC in this instance is an asset issuer, and when we look at kind of like the main assets or the main tokens that a lot of us use, there's really kind of a small list. Bitcoin is obviously up there. The different flavors of USDs, USDC, USDT, et cetera. You have Ethereum, you have Solana, maybe you have Bonk in there. But there's kind of these core assets, and when it comes to Wormhole, we do have to be kind of this neutral party, right? We are the rails in which these assets get to wherever they want to go. So for tBTC, obviously getting to Solana, but we do try and work with them to get penetration within the ecosystem. And we have to be, I think what we're seeing is just being a little bit more selective on what assets, especially DEXs, will incentivize. Like when it comes to their incentives, there's a finite amount. So they're probably going to put incentives on the more popular assets, build deep liquidity because there's not as much, and make sure that like when the user is, let's say, coming in and out of the ecosystem, they're going to experience like as little slippage as possible. So I think we're just seeing incentives being focused on, and especially for us, when it comes to like partners, asset issuers, we're focusing on kind of that smaller amount of assets at the top. And unfortunately, the long tail isn't getting as much focus, but I think it's important for us to build liquidity and deep liquidity for the major assets that people are holding and using.
And I mean, it's typically something that comes with the changing winds of a market. So good that the infrastructure is there and available. But yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Well, I'm just going to comment on, so one of the things that the Threshold DAO has been really good at, which is the DAO behind, or the network behind tBTC, is the way it's structured is, so I like to say there's no decentralization theater at the Threshold DAO. First of all, like everything about this DAO, it's got a lot of cypherpunk DNA first and foremost. I mean, we put the Wormhole guys through the ringer on the governance forum as an example, and they were good sports about that. So everything that we do in terms of involving tBTC, things like changing the fees or launching on new chains or partnering with bridging providers, launching and even like incentives with T has to be approved by the DAO, and we have a treasury guild that operates this, and there's a good portion of the T supply that's dedicated for liquidity mining or liquidity growth initiatives. And so we are in the Solana ecosystem on a rolling kind of monthly, weekly basis. In some instances, we're incentivizing those pools. And that helps galvanize short-term sort of shot in the arm growth and adoption of the asset. But where ideally you look to drive and grow into new areas that are real use cases that, you're not just sort of farming and moving on, right? So for us, one of the things that we recognize from the Solana ecosystem, and we actually have a proposal in with Mango DAO right now. The folks at Mango DAO are actually moving all of their WBTC to tBTC. It's about 100 Bitcoin or so in the works here over the next couple months, which is pretty exciting. So we are seeing more and more tBTC kind of being this treasury asset of choice on the Solana ecosystem and other chains as well, but in particular Solana, because folks recognize the importance of having an underlying, decentralized spot asset that is a representative of Bitcoin. And so we're not doing actually really incentivizing for any of that at all, because there's a real use case there. But having the incentives on the pools also makes it a little more fun, right? Because you can kind of play the liquidity game as well. So we're kind of going after both prongs, and then the incentives offer and open up a lot of organic growth activations for us off the bat.
And just to comment on this, I think that it's the kind of the age-old thing, like the crypto term of liquidity begets liquidity. Yeah. I think even when we were planning out go-to-market, I think the DEXs are focused on the top assets, right? Yep. So the BTCs, the ETH, the SOLs, the USDC flavors. But it's the same like with asset issuers go to market. It's like, where's the deepest liquidity? Yep. And then you put incentives on where the deepest liquidity is, and then it gets more liquidity. And there's a consolidation around like, a few of the core DeFi primitives.
Right.
It's exactly. I just think it's even more magnified in a market like this.
Totally. And then building utility on top, spot, lending, and then derivatives, that full sort of stack of yield generation and structured products, which is critical for launching a new asset. You want to make sure you have the full life cycle of the asset available for users to do whatever it is they want to do.
Yep. So with the few minutes that we have left here, I want to give you guys both an opportunity to talk about what's the future of tBTC on Solana. What are you guys focusing on moving forward? Also, if you'd like to independently speak to the future of Wormhole integrations and some of the stuff that you guys have in the work, Robinson. But happy to give it to you first, Brian.
You want to go?
Or go ahead.
Pass it down the line.
All right, so for us, I mean, as I kind of touched on a little bit earlier, but I can get into it in more detail. Phase one was just getting Bitcoin on Solana and filling the void or the vacuum there that was left sort of in this post-FTX world. And you're making sure that we're sort of solid there from a risk and bridging perspective and growing organically with our partners. And now that we've arrived and we've had sort of our first crop of partners alive, we're looking to grow more deeper into the ecosystem, building out utilities, as I mentioned. So, starting with the spot, growing into lending and derivatives as part of like the Mango partnership, for example. And then beyond that, also, we see a lot of opportunities for establishing tBTC as a treasury asset at the DAO level. So, if folks are interested in that, please get in touch. I would love to chat more about some of your treasury needs and how we can maybe help answer them, especially if you're looking to get some exposure to Bitcoin. And then in terms of the way we think about bringing more capital into the Solana ecosystem, which is a very important thing, and for us, we're growing within the ecosystem, but I think ultimately you want to grow the TVL of the overall pie for all of our partners. And Bitcoin is a great vehicle to do that, given it's the largest market, and we've established this flow and value chain. But it's a little clunky in the process, right? I think there's some aspects of you got to go from Bitcoin to ETH to Wormhole to pick your partner, bridge it to Solana, and then deposit it in that pool, and then come all the way back, right? So the more simplified we can make that process, the better it is for the user experience, and overall just reduces a lot of the friction in the capital deposit process and brings more inflows to the ecosystem. So our development team's been working on a tBTC SDK, software development kit that allows for easy minting on the Solana ecosystem, and that's part of what we're looking to do. So you can actually bring Bitcoin to Solana directly And ideally, we would partner with a few folks in the ecosystem to help make that a reality and reduce a lot of that friction for bringing Bitcoin to Solana and growing the TVL as an ecosystem overall. So that's something that we're working on as we speak.
Go ahead, Rob.
Well, when it comes to Wormhole and Solana, first and foremost, we want to make it the best place to trade BTC. We've got the asset, we've got the low fees, we've got the speed. Now we're working on the liquidity. So that's definitely the goal. But I think with Wormhole and Solana, we obviously have a long-standing relationship. Again, to use a term that's popular, we're very Solana aligned. For us, we kind of view it as a responsibility to make this kind of Solana. We want Solana to connect all these chains in the best way possible, and in the most liquid way possible, I should say. So for us, obviously, we're working closely with Circle and CCTP. For those who aren't familiar, CCTP is Circle's essentially burn and mint protocol in order to get native USDC from one chain to another. They're here, testnet's live, mainnet's coming. We're working closely with them to bring USDC from any CCTP-enabled chain to Solana, and we kind of add additional functionality. So you could, let's say, send USDC from ETH to Solana and deposit into an LP position all in a transaction. But I say all that because what we're doing is we have Wormhole Connect SDK. The way to think about our SDK is that it just aggregates all Wormhole routes, so all the 27 chains we're connected to, and then the applications that build cross-chain swaps on top of that. And what we're rolling out, a little bit of alpha, we're working on a few different liquidity-related initiatives, but we want to make any route for Solana as liquid as possible. I think we're kind of going through this progression of, let's just continue to use the ETH and Solana corridor, where we enabled there to be assets being transferred back and forth to Solana. Along the way, we ran into some not bumps, but things that we can improve upon. One of those is slippage, right? If a lot of these assets are Wormhole assets, if there isn't liquidity or enough liquidity in some of them, you could run into a lot of slippage. Now, with this kind of liquidity design, CCTP, and the Wormhole Connect SDK, you'll be able to give this SDK to projects like Jupiter, for instance. They can aggregate it, and all of a sudden, you can compose native token to native token swaps. USDC will no longer have 3-4% slippage. So I think the most exciting thing for us when it comes to that is there's a lot of initiatives that kind of go into this SDK, but soon every route from Solana to these other chains will be as liquid as possible. So that's really exciting for us, and I think will be amazing for the users of Solana and also the builders of Solana.
Love to hear that.
So with the last 2 minutes that we have here, one, would love for you guys to tell the audience where they can get in touch with you guys, find you on social or otherwise, and also if you guys have any resources that you'd like to point them to, website, docs, or otherwise.
For sure. So you can mint tBTC on threshold.network. Also docs.threshold.network is a lot of good info there. But if you really want to dig in, our GitHub is the best place to go. There's more detail there than any place else. Deep code dives, as well as a lot of great explainers. So yeah, you can get in touch with me. I'm Blockchain Bry on Telegram, and I'll share it all with you. There's also some good Dune dashboard trackers out there. I think we hit something like we're closing in on 100 Bitcoin on Solana right now as of today. So yeah, it's going to be that's going to be a good one to keep tabs on.
Yeah, for us, if you are a builder and looking to build something cross-chain, you can just go to docs.wormhole.com. If you want to send tokens cross-chain, there's many different UIs and front ends, carrier.so, portal bridge, etc. But yeah, same with Brian. You can get in touch with me on Telegram pretty easily, Robinson Berkey. Yeah, thank you for having us.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you for sticking with us late in the day.
Appreciate it.
Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.